Hi, my name is Scott. I'm from the Economics Tutoring Center, and today I'll be doing some examples of short-run and long-run aggregate supply and demand. Please make sure to check my notation and language use with your professor because it may vary. So now we have two example questions where we're dealing with long-run equilibrium. The questions are split up, so we'll go through each of them one by one. Okay, so first like it says, we're talking about an economy that starts in long-run equilibrium. And then what are the short-run and long-run effects of a sudden increase in consumption from households? Okay, and part A of this question asks us, how does the consumption change affect aggregate demand and aggregate supply in the short run? So first we just want to talk about the short run. And because of that, I'll draw the economy. For now, I will ignore the long-run aggregate supply. So we just have our usual upward sloping short-run aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Okay, and we know that there's an increase in consumption. That's what the question tells us. So if you recall, aggregate demand is equal to these four components of GDP. Consumption plus investment spending plus government spending plus net exports. And it tells us that there's an increase in consumption by households. So because of this increase, we know that aggregate demand will shift to the right. And nothing is happening here to resource prices or wages or technology. So there is no shift for short-run aggregate supply. Okay, so that's our scenario in the short run. Now part B of the question asks us to say what happens in the long run. So if we draw our graph again, so now I'm not going to ignore the long run aggregate supply. So let's say it tells us the economy started in equilibrium. So our long-run aggregate supply goes right through this intersection. Then, like we said before, there's a shift to the right in aggregate demand. Okay, so we saw that there's a short-run shift in aggregate demand, and if you'll notice what that does is increase price level. So price level goes up. We say though in the short run, so I mentioned this, that the costs of production do not change. So if prices are higher, but firms don't have to pay any more for their resources or to hire workers, then output will go up for firms. And we see that in the short run because, again, if we look at our new equilibrium, it has a higher output than we had before. But then in the long run, this is true, this part is true for the short run. In the long run, it's not true because workers will see that prices are going up and they'll demand higher wages. So cost of production, long run, cost of production will go up. They'll increase, and that will mean that it's more expensive for producers to produce. So short-run aggregate supply will shift to the left. They'll decrease their output, and typically what happens is we decrease just enough so that we end up right at this new equilibrium that has the same real output as we did before. That's why it's called long-run equilibrium, because we typically end up at the same level of output. Notice though that the price level can be much higher than it was before the initial increase in consumption. Okay, so that's our examples for today of short-run and long-run aggregate supply and demand. I hope it helped, and if you have any further questions, please come into the tutoring center or ask your professors.